Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I didn't intend to come here this year. My country is at war, fighting for its life. But after I heard the lies and slanders leveled at my country by many of the speakers at this podium, I decided to come here and set the record straight. I decided to come here to speak for my people, to speak for my country, to speak for the truth. And here's the truth. Israel seeks peace. Israel yearns for peace. Israel has made peace and will make peace again. Yet we face savage enemies who seek our annihilation, and we must defend ourselves against these savage murderers. Our enemies seek not only to destroy us, they seek to destroy our common civilization and return all of us to a dark age of tyranny.
So, what's up mga kataps, no? So, welcome sa CME News. So, sa hindi pa natin tapusin tong video na to kay Benjamin Netanyahu na yung Prime Minister sa Israel. So, what's up pala sa inyo, no? Magandang umaga sa buong Pilipinas at saka sa buong mundo, sa lahat ng mga nanonood sa ating video, no? So, maraming salamat sa inyong suporta. So, itong mga salita ni Benjamin Netanyahu, ito si Benjamin, di ba? Para ding isa ding pangalan ng sa 12 son of Israel, di ba? Yung 12 anak ni Israel, may pangalan din yung Benjamin, si Jose, ganyan yung mga pangalan. Kaya ito si Benjamin Netanyahu, din sinasabi niya na yung Israel ay pinangako to ng Diyos, di ba? Kinuha sila nung alipin sila ng panahon ni Moises, anong panahon pa na si Moises, inalipin sila ng Ehipto. Pero ang Diyos binawi sila, kinuha sila, pinagi kang Moises. Kaya yun mga ka-CME News. So yung mga Israel, binalik sila sa yuta kung saan sila nanggaling. So sa malaking himala. So dinala sila ni Moises sa kabundukan, tapos binalik sila at magsamba sa Panginoong Diyos nga nasa langit. So yun ang sinasabi ni Benjamin Netanyahu. Kaya yan sila nung panahon dati, kahit konti lang talaga sila, panahon pa kay Solomon, kay David. So yun sila mga ka-CME News. Totoong manlaban talaga sila, kaya wala silang kinatakutan kasi ang Diyos naman talaga nandyan sa kanila lagi. Lalo na pag sumusunod sila sa utos ng Diyos. Ang Diyos hindi sila iiwanan. Kaya yung Israel kasi, dyan pinanganak yung hari na mao si Kristo, di ba? So yan, panoorin natin yung mga ni Benjamin Netanyahu, yung Prime Minister sa Israel. So yan mga katapos, panoorin natin.
And terror. When I spoke here last year, I said we face the same timeless choice that Moses put before the people of Israel thousands of years ago. As we were about to enter the Promised Land, Moses told us that our actions will determine whether we bequeath to future generations a blessing or a curse. And that is the choice we face today. The curse of Iran's unremitting aggression, or the blessing of a historic reconciliation between Arab and Jew. In the days that followed that speech, the blessing I spoke of came into sharper focus. A normalization deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel seemed closer than ever. But then came the curse of October 7th. thousands of Iranian-backed Hamas terrorists from Gaza burst into Israel in pickup trucks, on motorcycles, and they committed unimaginable atrocities. They savagely murdered 1,200 people. They raped and mutilated women. They beheaded men. They burned babies alive. They burnt entire families alive. Babies, children, parents, grandparents, in scenes reminiscent of the Nazi Holocaust. Hamas kidnapped 251 people from dozens of different countries, dragging them into the dungeons of Gaza. Israel has brought home 154 of these hostages, including 117 who returned alive. I want to assure you, we will not rest until the remaining hostages are brought home too. And some of their family members are here with us today. I ask you to stand up. With us is Eli Stevie, whose son Idan was abducted from the Nova Music Festival. That was his crime. A music festival. And these murderous monsters took him. Kobe Smirno, whose son Jonathan was murdered, and his corpse was taken into the dungeons, into the terror tunnels of Gaza. A corpse held hostage. Salim al-Atrash, whose brother Muhammad, a brave Arab-Israeli soldier, was murdered. His body too was taken to Gaza. And so was the body of Ifat Hyman's daughter in Bar, who was brutally murdered at that same music festival. With us is Sharon Sharabi, whose brother Yossi was murdered, and who prays for his older brother Eli, who is still held hostage in Gaza. And with us too is Izhar Liftich from Kibbutz Nir Oz, a kibbutz that was wiped out by the terrorists. Thankfully, we achieved the release of his mother Yocheved.
Ito pala mga akasiminios, no, ang maisog na salita ni Benjamin Netanyahu nung doon siya sa United Nations, no. Sinabi talaga niya kung ano ang totoo, kung bakit nandoon siya about sa nangyari ng malaking kaguluhan ngayon sa Israel at saka sa ibang bansa. Kasi alam naman natin yan dati pa talaga na noong pamuno pa sa panahon nila ni David ng mga hari sa Israel na talaga silang tinutugis ng kanilang mga kalaban, mga kalapit bansa. Kaya hanggang ngayon, lagi silang tinutugis kasi alam mo naman yung sinasabi niya na ni Benjamin Netanyahu, yung Prime Minister, no, na Dark Age. So yung mga masasama talaga, hindi nila talaga pipigilan yung mga gumagawa ng kayusan, tama. Lagi talaga kang inaaway. Yun ang sasabi ni Benjamin. So panoorin natin mga kataps.
But his father Oded is still languishing in an underground terrorist hell of Hamas. I again promise you, we will return your loved ones home. We will not spare that effort until this holy mission is accomplished. Ladies and gentlemen, the curse of October 7th began when Hamas invaded Israel from Gaza. But it didn't end there. Israel was soon forced to defend itself on 6 more war fronts organized by Iran. On October 8th, Hezbollah attacked us from Lebanon. Since then, they fired over 8,000 rockets at our towns and cities, at our civilians, at our children. 2 weeks later, the Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen launched drones and missiles at Israel, the first of 250 such attacks, including one yesterday aimed at Tel Aviv. Iran's Shiite militias in Syria and Iraq have targeted Israel dozens of times over the past year as well. Fueled by Iran, Palestinian terrorists in Judea and Samaria perpetrated scores of attacks there and throughout Israel. And last April, for the first time ever, Iran directly attacked Israel from its own territory, firing 300 drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles at us. I have a message for the tyrants of Tehran. If you strike us, we will strike you. There is no place in Iran that the long arm of Israel cannot reach. And that's true of the entire Middle East. Far from being lambs led to the slaughter, Israel's soldiers have fought back with incredible courage and with heroic sacrifice. And I have another message for this assembly and for the world outside this hall. We are winning. Ladies and gentlemen, as Israel defends itself against Iran in the seven-front war, the line separating the blessing and the curse could not be more clear. This is the map I presented here last year. It's a map of a blessing. It shows Israel and its Arab partners forming a land bridge connecting Asia and Europe between the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea. Across this bridge, we will lay rail lines, energy pipelines, fiber optic cables, and this will serve the betterment of 2 billion people. Now look at this second map. It's a map. Look at the second map. It's a map of a curse. It's a map of an arc of terror that Iran has created and imposed from the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean. Iran's malignant arc has shut down international waterways. It cuts off trade. It destroys millions, destroys nations from within, and inflicts misery on millions. On the one hand, a bright blessing, a future of hope. On the other hand, a dark future of despair. And if you think this dark map is only a curse for Israel, if you think that, then you should think again. Because Iran's aggression, if it's not checked, will endanger every single country in the Middle East and many, many countries in the rest of the world. Because Iran seeks to impose its radicalism well beyond the Middle East. That's why it funds terror networks on 5 continents. That's why it builds ballistic missiles for nuclear warheads to threaten the entire world. For too long, the world has appeased Iran. It turns a blind eye to its internal repression. It turns a blind eye to its external aggression. Well, that appeasement must end. And that appeasement must end now. Nations of the world should support the brave people of Iran who want to rid themselves of this evil regime. Responsible governments should not only support Israel in rolling back Iran's aggression, they should join Israel. They should join Israel in stopping Iran's nuclear weapons program. In this body, in the Security Council, we're going to have a deliberation in a few months. And I call on the Security Council to snap back UN Security Council sanctions against Iran, because we must all do everything in our power to ensure that Iran never gets nuclear weapons. For decades, I've been warning the world against Iran's nuclear program. Our actions delayed this program by perhaps a decade, but we haven't stopped it. We've delayed it, but we haven't stopped it. Iran now seeks to weaponize its nuclear program for the sake of the peace and security of all your countries. For the sake of the peace and security of the entire world, we must not let that happen. And I assure you, Israel will do everything in its power to make sure it doesn't happen. So, ladies and gentlemen, The question before us is simple. Which of these two maps that I showed you will shape our future? Will it be the blessings of peace and prosperity for Israel, our Arab partners, and the rest of the world? Or will it be the curse in which Iran and its proxies spread carnage and chaos everywhere? Israel has already made its choice. We've decided to advance the blessing. We're building a partnership for peace with our Arab neighbors while fighting the forces of terror that threaten that peace. We took out their replacements, and then the replacements of their replacements. And we'll continue degrading Hezbollah until all our objectives are made. Ladies and gentlemen, we're committed to removing the curse of terrorism that threatens all civilized societies. But to truly realize the blessing of a new Middle East, we must continue the path we paved with the Abraham Accords 4 years ago. Above all, this means achieving a historic peace agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And having seen the blessings that we've already brought with the Abraham Accords, the millions of Israelis who've already flown back and forth across the Arabian Peninsula, over the skies of Saudi Arabia, to the Gulf countries, the trade, the tourism, the joint ventures, the peace, made their choice. They want to move back to a dark age of terror and war. And now I have a question. And I pose that question to you. What choice will you make? Will your nation stand with Israel? Will you stand with democracy and peace? Or will you stand with Iran, a brutal dictatorship that subjugates its own people, exports terrorism across the globe? In this battle between good and evil, there must be no equivocation. When you stand with Israel, you stand for your own values and your own interests. Yes, we're defending ourselves, but we're also defending you against a common enemy that through violence and terror seeks to destroy our way of life. So there should be no confusion about this. But unfortunately, there is a lot of it in many countries and in this very hall, as I've just heard. Good is portrayed as evil, and evil is portrayed as good. We see this moral confusion when Israel is falsely accused of genocide, when we defend ourselves against enemies who try to commit genocide against us. We see this too when Israel is absurdly accused by the ICC prosecutor of deliberately starving Palestinians in Gaza. What an absurdity. We helped bring in 700,000 tons of food into Gaza. That's more than 3,000 calories a day for every man, woman, and child in Gaza. We see this moral confusion when Israel is falsely accused of deliberately targeting civilians. We don't want to see a single person, a single innocent person die. That's always a tragedy. And that's why we do so much to minimize civilian casualties, even as our enemies use civilians as human shields. And no army has done what Israel is doing to minimize civilian casualties. We drop flyers, we send text messages, we make phone calls by the millions to ensure that Palestinian civilians get out of harm's way. We spare no effort in this noble pursuit. We see yet another profound moral confusion when self-described progressives march against the democracy of Israel. Don't they realize they support the Iranian-backed goons in Tehran and in Gaza? The goons who gun down protesters, murder women for not covering their hair, and hang gays in public squares, some progressives. According to the US Director of National Intelligence, Iran funds and fuels many of the protesters against Israel. Who knows, maybe some of the protesters, or even many of the protesters outside this building now. Ladies and gentlemen, King Solomon, who reigned in our eternal capital, Jerusalem, 3,000 years ago, proclaimed. He proclaimed something that is familiar to all of you. He said, "There is nothing new under the sun." Well, in an age of space travel, quantum physics, and artificial intelligence, some would argue that's a debatable statement. But one thing is undeniable. There is definitely nothing new at the United Nations. Take it from me. I first spoke from this podium as Israel's ambassador to the UN in 1984. That's exactly 40 years ago. And in my maiden speech here, I think it's the same podium, by the way. In my maiden speech here, I spoke against a proposal to expel Israel from this body. 4 decades later, I find myself defending Israel against that same preposterous proposal. And who's leading the charge this time? Not Hamas, but Abbas, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. This is the man who claims he wants peace with Israel. Yet he still refuses to condemn the horrific massacre of October 7th. He's still paying hundreds of millions to terrorists who murder Israelis and Americans. It's called pay for slay. The more you murder, the more you get paid. And he still wages unremitting diplomatic warfare against Israel's right to exist and against Israel's right to defend itself. And by the way, they amount to the same thing. Because if you can't defend yourself, you can't exist. Not in our neighborhood, certainly, and maybe not in yours. Standing in this podium 40 years ago, I told the sponsors of that outrageous resolution to expel Israel, "Gentlemen, check your fanaticism at the door." Today, I tell President Abbas and all of you who would shamefully support that resolution, check your fanaticism at the door. The singling out of the one and only Jewish state continues to be a moral stain on the United Nations. It has made this once respected institution contemptible in the eyes of decent people everywhere. But for the Palestinians, this UN House of Darkness is home court. They know that in this swamp of anti-Semitic bile, there's an automatic majority willing to demonize the Jewish state on anything. In this anti-Israel flat earth society, any false charge, any outlandish allegation can muster a majority. In the last decade, there have been more resolutions passed against Israel. To the people of Israel and to the soldiers of Israel, I say, be strong and of good courage. חזקו ואמצו ואל תיראו מפניהם, כי אדוני אלוהיך הוא ההולך עמך, לא ירפך ולא יעזבך. עם ישראל חי, the people of Israel live, now, tomorrow, forever. Thank you.
So yun, nung pag napanood nyo mga kataps, no, subscribe naman mga kataps, pa-like and share sa ating video. Para marami pa tayong videos na i-upload. So maraming salamat yung papanood. Sana marami pa tayong ma-upload, no? So yun lang sa akin mga Kasimi News. God bless inyong lahat. At laging tatandaan, huwag tayo basta magtiwala. Isa lang tiwala natin kundi ang Panginoon na sa langit, no? Yun lang talaga. So maraming salamat.